The IMF urges ECB to keep deposit rates at 2%. Trump announces 20% tariff on Vietnamese exports. And the World Gold Council reports 20 tons of gold bought by global central banks.
Feeling gold.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to Thursday night's Economic Bulletin from Qnews. I'm Mark Summers. The head of the IMF's European Department, Alfred Campbell, has said that the fund believes that the European Central Bank should maintain its current 2% deposit rate unless significant shocks alter the inflation outlook. Speaking at the ECB forum in Sintra, Cameron noted that Eurozone inflation faces two-sided risks. He highlighted that the ECB should maintain a 2% deposit rate unless a significant shock alters the inflation outlook. Adding, right now, IMF don't see anything of such magnitude. Asia Now and the Chinese Federation of Logistics and Purchasing has revealed that the warehouse storage sector registered active business activities in June, remaining in the expansion zone for the 8th consecutive month. The warehousing index gained 0.5 percentage points from last month to reach 51%. The new orders index climbed 51.6, up 0.7 percentage points from the previous month. Commerce Ministry spokeswoman from China, He Yongquan, has said that China attaches great importance to deepening economic and trade cooperation with other BRICS members.
近年来，在各方共同努力下，金砖国家经贸合作机制不断完善，经贸合作纽带持续拉紧。今年5月，在巴西举行的金砖国家第15次经贸部长会上，中方积极推动各方就加强多边贸易体制、数据经济治理、贸易与可持续发展等议题达成系列共识，丰富了金砖经贸合作内涵。特别是面对当前贸易紧张局势，各方一致认为，金砖成员要共同维护多边贸易体制，抵制单边主义和贸易保护主义，维护发展中国家、维护发展中成员合法权益。
That's China's Commerce Ministry spokesperson. Now, staying in Asia, and South Korean President Lee Jae-myung has emphasized the critical need for the government to actively implement a bold fiscal policy. During a news conference marking his first 30 days in office, he also noted that he was doing his best to achieve a mutually beneficial and sustainable outcome from trade negotiations with the United States. Lee further highlighted that South Korea must improve relations with North Korea based on a secure US-South Korea alliance and build ties with Russia and China. The World Bank has projected Thailand's economic growth to slow 1.8% this year and 1.7% next year amid intensifying global and domestic headwinds. In its Thailand Economic Monitor report, the bank noted that the slowdown reflects weaker exports and tourism, particularly due to a decline in arrivals from China, as well as domestic demand. It also highlighted that the monetary stance is projected to become more accommodative in 2025 due to rising domestic and external uncertainty, as well as falling inflationary pressures. Republicans in the House of Representatives have advanced US President Donald Trump's massive tax cut and spending bill, the One Big Beautiful Bill, toward a final yes or no vote earlier this morning, appearing to overcome internal party divisions over its cost. The bill would extend Trump's 2017 tax cuts, cut health, and cut food security and safety net programs. Fund Trump's immigration crackdown and zero out many green energy initiatives and incentives. It also includes a $5 trillion increase in the nation's debt ceiling, which lawmakers must address in the coming months or risk a devastating default. However, Democrats are united in to the bill, saying that its tax breaks disproportionately benefit the wealthy while cutting services that lower and middle income Americans rely on.
Alongside others are 213. The resolution is adopted.
The Labour Department has reported that US employers added 147,000 jobs in June as the American labour market continues to show surprising resilience despite uncertainty over President Trump's economic policies. The unemployment rate ticked down 4.1% by 222,000 from 4.2% in May, while hiring rose modestly from a revised 144,000. State governments added 47,000 workers and healthcare companies 39,000, but manufacturers shed 7,000 jobs. Revisions, however, added 16,000 jobs to April and June payrolls.
Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully take office of President of the United States.
Capitol open, the Americans and reciprocity.
Mexico, Canada, Greenland.
I'm also, and I don't.
The administration of US President Donald Trump has lifted restrictions on exports of chip design software to China as Washington and Beijing worked to dial down hostilities as part of a recent trade agreement. The US Commerce Department has rescinded export curbs on chip design software imposed in May, notifying leading companies like Synopsys, Cadence and Siemens, and Cadence and Synopsys are restoring access to restricted software in China, with Synopsys also assessing the impact on financials. Meanwhile, Siemens has already resumed full sales and support to Chinese customers. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has urged the European Union to settle a tariff dispute with the United States as quickly as possible to protect core industries such as cars, steel and pharmaceuticals.
Hier geht es jetzt um die schnelle Beilegung eines Zollstreits, insbesondere um die Schlüsselindustrien unseres Landes, chemische Industrie, pharmazeutische Industrie, Maschinenbau, Aluminium, Stahl, Automobilindustrie. Da muss jetzt ein schnelles Ergebnis mit den Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika erzielt werden. Ich werde alles tun, um die Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika an unserer Seite zu halten. Aber wir müssen uns auch darauf vorbereiten, dass zumindest das Engagement Amerikas für Europa und in Europa kleiner wird. Jetzt ist es Zeit für Europa, erwachsen zu werden. Die Amerikaner treiben uns in die Richtung, immer dichtere Regulierung zu machen, auch was Solvenzanforderungen und so weiter betrifft, erklären dann aber im selben Atemzug, wir würden das aber in Amerika nicht übernehmen, weil das unseren Prinzipien widerspricht. So, da muss ich sagen...
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz there. Now, General Confederation of Italian Industry President Emanuele Orsin has warned that Italy risks being 20 billion euros in exports losing that and 118,000 jobs losing those next year if the US imposes tariffs on 10% on all European products, noting that it will be unsustainable for the Italian economy. Orsini added that tariffs would effectively translate into a 23.5% duty as the impact of the dollar depreciation against the euro since the election of President Trump, amounting to 13.55%, needing to be taken into account too. Chief Economic Minister Erlangga Hartarto has announced that Indonesia plans to sign a $34 billion with business partners next week to boost purchases from the United States, forming part of Indonesia's efforts to finalize a trade deal with Washington before July 9th. Hartarto noted that the Memorandum of Understanding signed on June 7th, or scheduled to be signed then, encompassing new Indonesian investments and purchases in the United States. The minister added that this initiative demonstrates the unified response of the government, regulators, state-owned enterprises, and the private sector to the imposition of US reciprocal tariffs. He added that by addressing the trade balance with the United States, Indonesia hopes to get a better trade deal than the one struck with Vietnam. And speaking of Vietnam, US President Donald Trump has announced a lower than promised 20% tariff on many Vietnamese exports, cooling tensions with its 10th biggest trading partner, days before the US president could raise levies on most other imports. He added that Vietnamese goods will face a 20% tariff and transshipments from countries through Vietnam will face a 40% levy, he said. Vietnam could import US products with a 0% tariff. On Truth Social, Trump hailed great honor after speaking with Vietnam's top leader, Vu Lam. And in their reply, Vietnam has hailed the new trade deal with the United States as a breakthrough and said that its negotiators were continuing and coordinating with the United States counterparts to formalize terms with Washington. Vietnamese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Pham Tu Hang also noted that negotiators were finalizing the terms with U.S. counterparts. She highlighted that despite their small segment exporting to the U.S., they were pleased with the tax adjustment and it would foster favorable conditions for increased Vietnamese exports to the United States to enhance competitiveness and small businesses like theirs. Hang added that the party's General Secretary Tu Lam highly values President Trump's attention to
Tổng Donald Trump với Việt Nam, quan hệ hai nước. Và nhân đây thì tôi cũng xin
Now, in response to Trump's announcement, China has said that it is assessing the trade deal between the US and Vietnam and will safeguard its own rights and interests if needed. Chinese Commerce Ministry spokesperson He Yongquan noted at a regular press briefing that the country firmly opposes any party reaching a deal at the expense of China's interests. Also, the Chinese Foreign Ministry highlighted its own statement that any economic trade differences should be resolved through quick and equal dialogue and consultation. Now to the MENA region, and Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli of Egypt held a meeting with Minister of Petroleum and Mineral Resources Karim Badawi to review the latest updates on the progress of repairing and connecting the floating regasification units to the national grid and national gas grid. During the meeting, the Petroleum Minister presented the status of work related to equipping and linking the floating regasification units through Egyptian ports to the national gas network. He emphasized the concerted efforts of all relevant entities and national companies to complete the work according to the planned timelines, ensuring the security and sustainability of natural gas supplies to both production and consumption sectors across the country. Egypt's Minister of Tourism and Antiquities, Sharif Fathi, held discussions with a leading global company specializing in the construction, operation and management of river and sea cruise ships to explore potential cooperation in developing the Nile cruise tourism product in Egypt. The minister emphasized the importance of the Chinese market for Egyptian tourism, increase in the number of Chinese tourists visiting Egypt last year, and expressing the minister's hopes for continued growth in the coming period. He invited the company to submit a detailed study outlining its vision and implementation plan for enhancing Nile cruise tourism in Egypt, with a view to reviewing it by the ministry. Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Tourism has reported a balance of payments surplus of approximately 26.8 billion Saudi Arabian riyals for travel in Q1 2025, as compared with a year earlier. The ministry noted that spending by inbound tourists reached a record $49.4 billion Saudi Arabian riyals in Q1 2025, marking a 10% hike compared to Q1 2024. Accordingly, the first quarter travel surplus grew by 12% year on year. Meanwhile, spending by outbound travelers reached 22.6 billion by the end of March 2025, up from 21 billion a year earlier. Saudi Arabia and Indonesia have finalized deals and memorandums of understanding valued at approximately $27 billion, focusing on collaboration between the private sector institutions in clean energy and petrochemicals during the Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto's visit to the kingdom. Both nations also committed to strengthening cooperation in crude oil and derivative supplies, enhancing energy supply chain sustainability, and bolstering partnerships in mineral resources. Saudi Arabia's ACWA Power signed initial agreements to explore renewable energy investment opportunities with Indonesia's Sovereign Wealth Fund and Danantara Indonesia and state energy firm Pertamina. Jordan's energy and water ministers met with their Syrian counterpart in Amman to advance cooperation in energy and water. Talks focused on increasing gas exports via the Arab gas pipeline, raising electricity interconnection from 250 to 300 megawatts, and rehabilitating shared infrastructure with support from regional and international powers. The two sides also agreed to visit the 1987 water sharing agreement and address falling Yarmouk River levels. Now we're talking about the situation with the United States, and we're talking about Vietnam as well. To have more on this with us, we're joined from Hong Kong by Benny Kwok, who is an economist. Thanks very much for being here with us on Q News. So what do you make of this 20% US tariff on Vietnamese imports to impact Vietnam's export-driven economy? What do you think about this?
Well, thank you for inviting me. So I'm sure the world is watching closely on the trade negotiations between the United States and Vietnam. So as we expected, that is, United States is, rather than putting the 20% tariff on Vietnamese goods, even more people are focusing on this 40% tariff on the transshipping tariff that is targeting, of course, Chinese goods that is made in Vietnam as well. So I would think for this negotiation, the result is as expected. And we could expect that maybe Vietnam would trying to keep. So I would say that Vietnam has could keep the export market with the United States, and I would think and I would guess more and more the Chinese capitals or the manufacturing powers may move, maybe shift from Vietnam to other places that is trying to escape the higher tariff, that is the 40% tariff, because would be very high cost for the Chinese manufacturing and the yeah.
And do you think that deal could serve as a template for future US trade agreements with other Asian countries?
I would think, okay, it is a very important example for the United States is trying to show that is any countries, especially South Asian, and would have a similar trade deal as between the United States and the Vietnam, and we could expect that is the United States is going to input and try to force the Southeast Asian to have a much higher tariff on the so-called transshipping, so that is to try to prevent the Chinese goods to try to escape the tariff policy by the United States. So we could see that is because we are seeing the Chinese goods is trying to shift their assembly line, production line from China, from Southeast Asia, and even try to doing more actively try to shift their production line in Europe and as well. So yes, and that would be the trend that we could expect in the coming year.
And what concerns has China expressed about these trade deals, with quotes like "we target," or that they target or harm the interests of third parties, or they may do at least? Would China consider this a threat to its interests, would you think?
Yes. So I would say, okay, both United States and China is quietly trying to reshaping the globalization in the former years. That is both United States and China trying to shaping the world that is favoring their interests. So that's why we are seeing global trade with on the side of the United States, and also side that is on the side with China. That is separating the two, and also but both countries are doing quietly and trying to not to harm the allies and not to harm themselves, but they're doing quietly.
What about the transshipment provisions in this US-Vietnam deal? Could that be seen as a direct provocation?
Yes. I would say yes. This is the key for the I would say the reciprocal tariff that is initiated by Donald Trump, because in the past years, China can use all kinds of means, whether any components, any parts, any capital, or building factories out of China, trying to so-called escape the tariff policies. And time, Donald Trump is using Vietnam as the first example to try to show to other developing countries used to be close to China that is okay, if you do transshipping, then I will cost you a very high tariff, and so that's why I would think the Chinese investors, the Chinese factories, maybe they will move to the Europe, maybe they will move to the other parts of the world as well, so that they try to diffuse it and try to, okay, they may have another transshipment. I don't know, but we will see.
Yes, I mean, they have been giving quite serious overtures to Europe, and it seems to be quite a friendly response from European countries. So are these the kind of countermeasures that China might take if it feels that its interests could be compromised by these bilateral agreements?
Yes, I would say, okay, China doesn't always want to break the relations with Europe, and we, of course, Europe doesn't want very bad relations with China as well. Even though Europe is an ally of the United States, but because of the many European countries have their very big interests in China, especially the manufacturings, and there are many industrial productions in China, it is quite hard for Europe try to so-called retreat from China suddenly. And that's why we will see both United States, both China and Europe still need they need each another as well. But of course, the relations for these two blocks, I would say not to be very good, but I wouldn't say not very bad. But I would say keep it in this condition, I would say.
Well, thank you very much. It's always fascinating to get your input on these issues. Economist Benny Kwok there joining us from Hong Kong. Thank you very much indeed. Now we move on to the latest developments from the commodities sector. Oil prices fell slightly on Thursday as the possibility of US tariffs being reinstated raised questions about demand ahead of an expected supply boost by major producers. Brent crude futures fell 0.49% to $68.77 a barrel. US West Texas Intermediate crude declined 0.46% to $67.14 a barrel. The World Gold Council has revealed that global central banks bought another 20 tons of gold in May as conflict erupted in the Middle East. Data showed that total purchases were up from 12 tons in April, but lower than 12-month average of 27 tons. The WGC noted that fresh tensions in the Middle East may have reinforced the strategic appeal of buying gold for central banks looking to safeguard reserves against any geopolitical shocks. So to the gold prices, and gold fell 1% on Thursday as stronger than expected US payroll data cemented expectations that the Fed is unlikely to cut interest rates as early as previously anticipated, denting the metal's appeal. Spot gold fell 1% to $3,332.49 an ounce, while US gold futures were down 0.8% to $1,333. So to the global stock markets, and they presented a collective gain today with indexes largely up in the US, European and most Asian exchanges as well. In the US, the S&P 500 rose 0.83% and Nasdaq futures increased 0.02%, even as the Dow edges up 0.76%. In Europe, the UK's FTSE 100 was up 0.54%. France's CAC 40 inched up 0.18%, and Germany's DAX rose 0.51%. In Asia, Japan's Nikkei 225 edged up 0.06%. The Shanghai Composite Index rose 0.18%, and Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index was down 0.63%. Well, that's all for our economic bulletin, but just a chance to have a look at those main economic headlines again this evening. The IMF urges the ECB to keep deposit rates at 2%. Trump announces 20% tariff on Vietnamese exports. And as we've been hearing, the World Gold Council has reported that 20 tons of gold were bought by central banks. If you want more news from Q News 24 hours a day, you can go to our social media platforms at Q News EGY. Thanks for being here with me for the Economic Bulletin, and stay tuned for more updates on Q News.